Consider for a moment your daily routine. You wake up, you shower, you might have breakfast, and then you leave for work or school or whatever else your day holds. In that short sequence, every interaction that you've had has been designed by someone. Be it the clothes you put on, the packaging around your shampoo, or the icons on your car dashboard. And now consider everything you interact with. At some point it becomes almost impossible to create something entirely new. So where does original thought fit in the world of design?
My name is Ed Austin, I'm 23 and I'm a graphic design student at Falmouth University that has never created an original piece of work in my entire life. To elaborate, what I mean is that I've never created something that hasn't taken influence, either consciously or subconsciously, from something else that I've seen. And I think that idea is really fascinating. So throughout this documentary, I plan to look at design through a counterfeiter's perspective and copy the work of someone on my course. My chosen victim is Tom Benford. He's my housemate and fellow student. He has absolutely no idea that I'm doing this, and it will be really interesting to present him the work that he's made as my own and see how he reacts to it. I've got an interview with him before I show him his work, and then I'm going to show another interview of him after. So this is basically like a controlled experiment that I'm running, and I feel bad for him, but also I'm just too fascinated in what's going to happen to not take this up. I feel like designers are not really prepared for this at all. It's just sort of something that might happen, and then you'll either notice it happens or you don't notice it. But once you put something online, it's basically gone. You know, you can claim ownership all you want, but the fact of the matter is someone else can very easily copy that from a screenshot or simply just replicate it and say that they made it. Don't really know what else to say. Just get on with it, shall we?
I think there's something really alluring about creating images, and I think that there's sort of this like hidden power in creating images and kind of influencing people. And I think as a kid I always just found images interesting, and I don't know, particularly like Photoshop kind of got me involved in creating images and creating photo manipulations, and that's sort of where it all started with me. And then I discovered that graphic design was a thing, and then sort of from the moment that I discovered it was a thing, that was the one thing I wanted to do, and I sort of always knew. Like specifically graphic designer?
No.
Or just anything?
It's generally design related. I'll even classify.
Okay, well, relevant to what I'm working on with my dissertation at the moment, I would say the Pioneer plaque by Carl Sagan. So it's a sort of interstellar postcard that was put onto the Pioneer 10 and 11 probes that have left the solar system, and that is a really impressive piece of design for me because it's answering a design question that it's kind of out of the realm of design, it's out of the realm of culture, and for me, the way that it's made is just incredibly clever. It basically uses a hydrogen atom as the key to the rest of the postcard, and if you unlock that one piece of knowledge, you have the whole rest of the postcard that you can understand. And I just think that all the elements on it are just like almost perfect. Just such a clever piece of design.
Okay. You brought with you a project you're working on.
I have.
Talk about that.
This is a project based on Cassini. So Cassini is a spacecraft that was sent to Saturn, launched in 1997. And this is a project called Dear Cassini, and it's basically about humanizing and personifying Cassini, because I feel like as humans, the way that we interact with things, the way that we can connect with things is by kind of giving them human qualities. And so when you're looking at the articles about Cassini and you're looking at the videos of the controllers at NASA, they're kind of, you know, they're crying because they're steering this craft into Saturn, and the craft's going to die, and it's like this becomes this person, it becomes this thing with emotions and this thing with a history. And so this project kind of looks at taking that and putting it into a few objects that kind of summarize Cassini's existence. So for example, there's a gravestone with Cassini's last words. So it's just the last few binary digits that Cassini sent back to Earth. There's a the last letters that Cassini sent, so it's kind of like an exchange between NASA and Cassini, sort of like love letters. Yeah, an obituary as well, summarising Cassini's life, but kind of alluding to the fact that it did all this amazing, it took over 450,000 photographs, travelled 4.9 billion miles. It never mentions that it's a spacecraft, so it tries to kind of trick people into thinking that, oh, it could be a person. And I just think that's a really interesting way of kind of curating what Cassini did in a way that people could actually connect with and understand.
So, obviously you're quite pleased with your Cassini project.
I am.
Like, how would you feel if you saw that somewhere else now?
I mean, I think it would really depend on like the context that it was in. It depends about the context for me. If someone just put it on their Instagram and they didn't sort of give any credit or anything, I'd be a little bit like, okay, what's going on here? Maybe comment on it saying like, this is my work, where's the credit? Nothing too rash. But if I saw someone, for example, their portfolio website and they had it listed as their portfolio piece and they'd literally just taken the images, I'd have a real problem with that, and I would probably kind of send like a really strongly worded email saying like, breaching intellectual property here, you need to take this down. I think it's hard to steal in a way because it's kind of a weirdly unique project, if you know what I mean. It's a weird take on it. I also don't know why someone would want to.
I have stolen Tom's work. He's at uni right now, and it's pretty easy for me to just go into his room and take it, to be honest, which I appreciate is not the same as going online, but you could argue it's much easier to go online. So for the purposes of what I'm doing, I'm copying his entire project, process work and all. Honestly, I have no idea what his work's about. You know, it's something to do with Cassini, and I know what that is, it's a probe, but it's about his last words. I'm not going to read too much into it. I feel like just presenting him with an outcome that he spent a lot of time on, that I don't really know anything about, is going to be more impactful than just presenting him something that I've copied but have now learned about. Because at the end of the day, when you copy stuff, you're not really necessarily going to pay attention to what actually it is and how it's made. It's a lot of stuff that's handwritten, which won't be too hard to copy. I'll write it out in my own handwriting. It is interesting to look at his work from the point of view of copying it rather than just critiquing it like I normally would. But yeah, it should be quite interesting to see how he reacts in the end. I'm going to see how he feels about the comparison of the two projects as well. How he feels about his work, looking at it next to mine. If he kind of feels that there's any difference between them. I mean, they are direct copy. There will be direct copies of each other, but will he still feel that his work is better, even though it's the same work, kind of thing? And how he'll feel actually just being shown some of his own work that's been copied.
You also have some examples of work that you've made that's been counterfeited or directly copied.
I have. So this is quite an interesting one. I was asked by San Francisco Ballet to create a season campaign for them. So they came to me and said, we want something fresh and new. Simply, I wanted to put that ballet company in an otherworldly context, but quite visually striking. This is an example of two dancers that I shot or directed, and I placed them simply in this context of this otherworldly natural environment. So that was one iteration. A year later, I was sent this by the client. It's actually a campaign for Louis Vuitton. I think it was shot by Craig McDean, and it has a striking similarity in the sense of those models being placed. That's Emma Stone. The models being placed in that environment, which is really quite similar when you put them side by side. In fact, you could almost paste them side by side and have it form one image. I was initially taken aback, and then I had a response of feeling quite chuffed that Louis Vuitton had seen it fit to kind of nick my idea, I guess. And then I had a feeling of, well, come up with your own blimmin' ideas, because I had to work quite hard to sell this in to the client. Anyway, it's a mix of emotions when you see your work being copied, and it's not the first time. I've had other instances where I've come across things I've seen on the underground or on billboards, and I thought, looks familiar, but you know, it is what it is. There's not a lot I can do about it really, other than take a little bit of comfort in the fact that people have seen what I've done and maybe borrowed from it in some way. Another example I have here is an identity, a brand campaign that I produced for the Donmar warehouse. It was a campaign that journeyed to New York when the production they were working on journeyed to the States. It was a campaign for the Shakespeare trilogy season, which was a season that comprised 3 plays, Julius Caesar, Henry IV and The Tempest, and they all starred Harriet Walter. So this went to New York and it was a great success. Everyone loved the campaign as well, really good. And then about a year later, or maybe more than a year later, I was walking through Soho and a bus passed by and I saw this on the side. It's a production image for Red Sparrow, which is a movie starring Jennifer Lawrence. And I thought, well, there's a similarity there in the sense that the eye is cutting through the key art. So I put the two side by side and, you know, maybe that's been nicked, maybe it hasn't. I'm not that bothered. I think it looks great. It's got great cut through. I think the two can exist in the world side by side, albeit separated by a year. So I wasn't too bothered. It's quite complimentary, as I said before, that maybe your work, my work, has been borrowed, has been influential in some way. Yeah, so it's not too much of an issue. And again, there's not a massive amount I can do about that, other than kind of live with it. There's not a massive amount we can do about it, unfortunately, other than, as I said before, other than to think, well, my work has been noticed, and to take comfort from that and to be encouraged by it. There's no point really being too annoyed about it. Hopefully justice will prevail and your work will be seen. Take comfort in the fact that people are looking at your work and noticing your work and being inspired by it.
Can you tell me a little bit about the few pieces of design that you had copied?
Yeah, there's a number of instances. So one of which that's really quite well known, I suppose, in the world of graphic design. It's not a project that I actually led, but it's a project that Landor completed in 2008 in Australia, doing the City of Melbourne rebranding, so place branding. At the time, it was really elegant, really clever execution that involved a sort of hero M sort of geometric mark. And as soon as that was released, it got lots of coverage in the design press, but it also got lots of coverage just because it was a really prominent example of good quality place branding. It began to be copied all over the place, and numerous instances of people just literally taking that mark and reapplying it for their own purposes, and many more instances of people clearly closely referencing that content and making a version of it. Part of the issue with that is that it was so distinctive that you can't help but see when it's been copied. I don't necessarily have an issue with people copying design work, but I think you should credit the author or credit the owner of the original work if you're going to do it.
How did you find out that people were copying your work? Was it purely just seeing it somewhere else? Or were there people telling you, like, you made this, didn't you? Or?
I think a combination of those things, yeah. So sometimes it is that you just encounter it, on your travels in the online world, or literally in a physical encounter. You might go past a billboard and you think, that looks exactly like what I did 6 months ago. But often it's through word of mouth and through other people in the design profession saying, I know you did that work a year ago. Have you seen this that looks exactly the same?
Do you think that students in design are kind of prepared for this aspect of design, or
Yeah, it's an interesting question. No, not necessarily, because I think part of why your work will be copied is because, not always, but often, because it's of a really good standard and people want to emulate that. And I think there are obviously issues around intellectual property and who owns what. And if you create something in your studio on behalf of a client, do you as the designer own that, or is it the client's ownership, or is the ownership sort of like a nebulous concept anyway? Because once you put it out into the world, how can you really own anything anymore anyway? But I suppose my point is that I think not every student would encounter that anyway, and if they were to encounter it, it's just something that you deal with as part of your journey towards becoming a designer, I think. I actually think it's quite positive if you find that your work is of a decent enough standard that someone else wants to borrow from it.
So one thing I did the other day was go around the studio and ask all of my fellow students how they felt about counterfeiting and copying. And basically everyone I spoke to told me that, well actually no, everybody I spoke to told me that it wasn't really great and that it's not really the sort of thing you should do and it's pretty bad overall. Generally very negative views, and that they wouldn't really think it was acceptable to do. Following day I went into the studio again. I asked everyone that was there to answer a question for me anonymously, just to write yes or no onto a little slip of paper and fold it up and pop it in this bag, so that I had no idea who wrote what. And the question was basically, have you ever copied anyone's work? Out of the 66 people I asked, 41 of them answered yes, and a following 25 of them said no, which was quite an interesting result, given that all of them were telling me that counterfeiting was bad. And I would hazard that it would be an acceptable argument that everyone that said no, they hadn't copied anything, is probably lying, because at some point everyone will copy something in design. But yeah, it was quite interesting, and if you look at these two piles, you can see quite clearly that there's almost double number of people that have copied people's work, even though they told me that they hadn't. And that was really interesting.
My name is Georgia Gooch, and I am an illustrator in training.
Someone else taking credit for your...
Oh, that's a different story.
Yeah.
No. If I could do something about it, then I would fight to, I don't know, I would see what I could do. I'd research into how I could, there must be some kind of law against it, surely. So I would take it to court if I could. If I couldn't do anything about it, I mean, there's no point. I mean, if it's something I really love, like at George, and I've been doing him all my life, then everyone around me would know because I tell everyone about this character. So, but there's no point, I guess there's no point staying really angry about it, because you just have to move on. I mean, I know it's your work and everything, but what can you do? We're not warned about it in our lessons or anything. There's no lecture about it, what to do. I guess that's kind of a bad thing. We should be warned about it. We should be told what do you do if this happens? Because does it happen a lot? You don't know. Oh, it does? Well, then how? Surely if it happened a lot, then we'd be made more aware of it. Surely.
Georgia raised an interesting point. So I decided to go have a chat with Brian, our course leader, about the structure of our course and its content.
Hiya. Are you ready?
Oh, we've got the cameraman.
I have. Well, he's going away now.
Do you have any thoughts on counterfeiting and design theft, particularly negatively?
Yeah, I suppose counterfeiting in design and copying others' work is bad. I think ultimately the area can be confusing. For example, you might suggest that to try and find the best idea, you look to life rather than design. One of the kind of bonuses and downsides of research in a kind of contemporary sphere is that within a very sort of short period of time you can find 300 versions of a museum identity or crisp packaging, whatever it might be, and so it's a very crowded marketplace. I do think that as in terms of teaching about it, as an undergraduate, I think what we would be doing is encouraging you to come up with original thoughts. The other thing we might do, so that's what we do on undergraduate course, and then what we do in, say, on the postgraduate is we do have discussions around intellectual property. So how do you protect your idea? What are the methods of patenting? Which is again more probably likely in product design and stuff like that.
So you know what I've been working on?
Yeah.
Do you know what I've been working on?
Well, I'm assuming that you've been working on duplicating my project.
Yeah.
Cool, you must have spent some time tracing over this.
No, I spent about 20 minutes doing this.
It's pretty weird, you know?
Yeah?
Yeah. It's pretty fucking odd.
Do you feel uncomfortable?
Oh my god, you've done that whole thing as well.
Yeah.
Wow, you must have really got an insight into my head.
Actually, I just copied the work you gave me. It was really easy to do. How do you feel
I feel deceived.
today?
It is odd. It
How
is
do you
odd.
feel seeing your work but in all my handwriting?
In your shitty handwriting.
Thanks.
It's like, it's weird, isn't it? It's like studio doppelganger. Like.
So, after having seen what I've made, in all honesty, how do you feel about it? Like, completely honest.
In complete honesty, I don't really care too much, mainly because I kind of, when you showed me it, I understood the whole context of why it was being made, and I think personally, for me, because I've had some work stolen in the past with the YouTube videos, I kind of understand that it's about this like disparity between outcome and origin, and I think that when people kind of take someone else's work or copy it and then they've had more success than the other person, that's when there's a problem. And I think that in the context of this being made, I think that you know, like if it's not being submitted, then there's no real like outcome, there's no real like profit off the outcome, and it's more just like an experiment in kind of like counterfeiting. But if it was to, for example, if you were to put it online, it was to receive lots of interest, or if it was to be submitted to be marked and actually got like a better grade than the same thing. Like, as I said, like if we both submitted that one project as a part of the module and then your one got a higher mark, I would be like, okay, what's that all about then? But then obviously, yeah.
How do you feel about counterfeiting in general?
In general? I think, I guess I could say I despise it. Like, whenever I see someone who has copied someone's work, I just lose all respect.
Does it bother you that you spent all this time working on it and I copied it, but I have no... My understanding of Cassini is not developed at all. Like, I don't really know anything about it. I read it for the purposes of copying it, but I didn't absorb any of the information in that sense.
I think it's a shame because the project was made with that in mind. It was made to kind of educate people about this space probe. I mean, I don't feel too sad about it, but like, it's kind of surprising that, I guess it was passive copying, but it's kind of surprising that you kind of sat there, did write out all this stuff, and then actually there was no interaction with like the meaning behind the project or what went into it. But I guess that is what counterfeiting is. It's hard, it's ruthless. It doesn't give a shit about the context. It only cares about the item itself, the artifact, and the value the artifact has in that society. So it doesn't give a shit about how hard you worked, how important it was to you, what it was about. It just cares that this is cool, I can make some money off this, like, or I can profit off it in some way. power, social media likes, whatever can get them up to the next level, whatever can step up whatever their plan is. So I guess it speaks to that true counterfeiting element where it's just completely ruthless and it just does not care about what the project's really about. So in a way, I'm not surprised because that's what it is.
I've been working on this project for quite a few weeks now, and I've come to some personal conclusions about counterfeit design. I don't intend to make any grand assumptions towards design and counterfeit design and how it affects everyone, because I think that's a bit brazen on my part. Personally, I've come to the conclusion that I don't approve. I feel like there's a lot of design where people take existing work and they alter it ever so slightly and they kind of feel like they put this new spin on it, but ultimately it's very similar work or it's the same work, and I don't think that it is acceptable to try and work off of existing work. I think you should aim to be as original as possible. Tom was my victim in this case study. I took some of his prized work and I made it my own, and I claimed it, and I said, I made this. I did it all without his knowledge. I took every element and I recreated it for my own benefit. I have to admit, Tom's reaction was a little bit underwhelming, but I think his reaction was that way because he's quite smart and he understands the context. And as he said, we're in one little university in the south of Cornwall. It's basically the middle of nowhere, so it's not really a big deal. I presented him with his project, and I suppose from his point of view, it's probably kind of funny. He'd be like, oh, he's done this thing, whatever. It's not real. It's not that I put his work online under a false name, for example, and then showed him like, oh, have you seen this? This guy's posted exactly the same stuff of you. But the problem is that wouldn't be believable because Tom hasn't posted that work anywhere. So it would be ridiculous that someone has somehow managed to get hold of all of his work, and given that I'm the only one that's borrowed his work, he'd know it was me. So it would equally invalidate the little experiment. Personally, I can't condone counterfeiting someone else's work. I don't think it's acceptable. I think you should strive for originality wherever you can, because otherwise you end up with 300 things that all look basically the same and there's nothing new, and often that's what really sells a product or communicates a message or whatever it is that you're trying to design. It's something different from everything else that's already there. It's these differences, these kind of like original thoughts that make things stand out and make things interesting to consumers and the general public. And I think that is what all designers should really strive for, rather than claiming others' work that they haven't made as their own. One thing I found to be most interesting was that professionals, staff members, they all kind of agreed that sure, it's a bit shit and you don't want it to happen, obviously, but it's kind of a compliment more than anything, in that people think your work is good enough that they actually want to imitate that. Unlike the student opinion, which was entirely negative and very, very much against counterfeiting, copying. They feel like, oh, I've spent a lot of time working hard on this, I'm trying to get a good grade or whatever. And I don't think it's anything I should condone, but at the end of the day, it's going to happen regardless. This experiment has affected me a lot more than I thought it would, in that I didn't think replicating Tom's process work and outcome would have any actual effect on me. It actually did. I felt bad doing it, which is bizarre because I know the context and I know that I'm not going to put it anywhere, and it's not going to go out into the world as my work. It's not going to be Ed Austin, creator of the Cassini project. I think the most impactful thing is just being the fact that I'm not doing anything that I shouldn't be doing, but I still feel like I've done something wrong. I imagine a lot of people came into this thinking that counterfeiting was particularly bad and it just shouldn't be accepted. But then again, there's quite a few people that actually don't think it's that bad, and they think that from something old, something can be reborn and recreated. And I can agree with that to an extent, but personally I feel that you should take inspiration, not a visual language or the whole content. The problem with going into this as a documentary for me is that I don't know what the outcome's going to be. I'm at the end of it and I'm trying to figure out what all of this is. And I think overall what it is basically, I'm never going to change anyone's opinion, but it would be nice to know that this has helped at least someone realise that actually I should really strive to be a bit more original. I should try and be more considerate about where my influence comes from and where I take it.